So again, I'm Justin. This is Tux. We've also got Kieran right there. He's another new Cypherino. Matur C. C? What? Say again? Snee. Snee. Oren? Snee. Matur. Keon. Have we met before? Okay. I believe you for now. Yeah?
I'm
Chris.
Chris.
Keon. Oren. Snee. Madhur. Oren. Keon. Chris. MD. 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 Got it. Okay. MD. Yeah. Huh? That's cool. Oh, that's terrible. So it's like start time, like almost now-ish. Okay, so I'm Justin, this is Tux, and that's Kieran at that end of the table. The three of us are a new Cypherino. That's our species designation. So let's go down this side of the table and see if we can get names.
Sure. I'm Lane.
Lane?
Yes.
Lane. Thomas.
Rahul.
What is it? Rahul. Rahul, Thomas, Lane, Tom. Not Thomas. So, Lane, Thomas, Rahul, Tom, MD, Chris, Keon, Oren, Snee, Madhur. All right, so far so good. We'll see. So let's have a little like 20 questions, but without any like goal toward any answer, just to see like who answers what. So like, who walked in the room primarily because they're like very concerned about like the future of the species in terms of privacy. Like your primary impetus is socio-political, maybe we'll say. Who's in that camp? Okay, so you've all got some kind of a. If it's not you, then you probably see if this raises your hand. You've got something in your life where you need to like manage secrets in a distributed app. Is that you? Raise your hands if that's you. Okay, this is going to be a little bit of like cold reading. I'm getting like a woman with a G name from that corner, a Gloria or Georgia. No, okay. Okay, who is here primarily because they think this might be like low-hanging fruit that they can hack on and win money? Who's like, is anybody in that camp? All right, we got one. Okay, so, you know, as DApps move into a domain of usability and reflection on userhood, that is to say, reflection on the sovereignty of the pecking of the keyboard and the smearing of the touchscreen at the other end of the app, inevitably there will be secrets. So, you know, I'd like to initially just sort of dispense with the idea that the only possible... I'll wait for these folks. Start by dispensing with the idea that the only real thrust for building something with something like NuCypher, and you probably could extend this to all cryptography if you were sort of willing to think about it with sufficient abstraction, that the only impetus is that there is a need for enduring secrecy, this idea that you have that will remain in a limited audience until the heat death of the universe, right? That's not really what this is, or at least not only what this is in theory. What it really is you've got stuff that you want some of your users to be able to see and others not see for some period of time. And you need to figure out how to handle that scenario without relying on the centralized infrastructure that until now we've been told is the one right way of doing that. Primarily, I hope what comes to your mind there is the bullshit like certificate authorities and, you know, there's this whole infrastructure, this whole secrecy industry that has sort of led down one path. And like many other components of the distributed web, what we're talking about here is starting from a similar intention and forging instead down a different path. We got a couple of classes on my screen here right now. Maybe you've heard of these crazy characters. They've been having a secret discussion since the early 70s, ongoing, unbroken, between Alice and Bob. And look at that, like half the tutorial room are my colleagues now. We'll see. We'll wait until we have like an uninterrupted 4 Gorley block times before we like reintroduce. So here you have on the screen, again, what I'm trying to do here is facilitate a discussion that helps you sort of understand the particulars without resorting to slides and sort of keeping you in our code base. Okay, so these two folks, Alice and Bob. Who's heard of Alice and Bob? Let's have a hand raised there. Okay, who's like never really? Who's like, what? Alice and Bob? What does that even mean? Anybody? Okay, we got maybe a couple. Okay, so when you want to discuss the abstractions of communication between two parties, typically what's done in sort of orthodox cryptology, if that's not too unreasonable a thing to say, is that we say, well, Alice sends a message to Bob that only Bob can read, unless some way in which the system can fail occurs, and then maybe we say Eve can read it. So we talk in terms of these people that are communicating with each other, right? But of course, in an environment of web applications, they're rarely people. They're often applications that are trying to talk within or between different servers and clients in the old model, or we might say decentralized nodes in the new model. So Alice and Bob have been around basically in a full-throated way since public key cryptography became widely used. This is the idea where Bob has a public key and Alice has a public key, and Bob can encrypt a message for Alice by using Alice's public key, and then only Alice can receive it by using her private key. So even though the cryptography is asymmetrical, right? There's a private key and a public key. You don't use the same key to decrypt that you do to re-encrypt. Nevertheless, what we do with this narrative is cause the narrative to become symmetrical, because there's nothing special about Alice or what she's capable of, nothing special about Bob or what he's capable of. Now, this works okay in the traditional speak when spoken to client-server model, I guess. It breaks down, though, fairly quickly when you're talking about the authority structure of a decentralized ecosystem. So what NuCypher does, this is sometimes we try to come up with an elevator pitch and see how few words we can say it. This is what you've just heard is the most words I think I could possibly say. This is my 8-minute, really long, slow elevator under maintenance sort of ride. So what NuCypher does really is we sort of dredge the world of cryptography papers and cryptography primitives, and we build some of those cryptography primitives into powers that are wielded by the characters in our narrative that allow you to do things that you can't do with public key cryptography alone. So the one that we'll show now is a power that a character that we call Ursula has. Let's show Ursula here. Now, when I talk about these characters, I want you to understand that these are not merely examples that we use in the documentation. These are actually classes in our code base. Why is lawful not shown up there? There we go. So here's Ursula, for example. Now, Ursula has the power of proxy re-encryption. This means she can act as a proxy between two communicating parties. She can take ciphertext encrypted for one public key, and at the behest of the authority of the policy, that's Alice, she can re-encrypt the ciphertext for a different public key to be decrypted by a different private key that matches that second public key. We do this with proxy re-encryption, which is a cryptographic primitive that was sort of had a lot of intellectual yeast in the late 90s. There was a paper about it in 1998, and then never really went anywhere, never achieved the kind of mainstream prominence that public key encryption has. Now, we believe that one of the reasons for that is that it is very, very helpful to have a swarm of decentralized, disinterested nodes who are less likely to collude with one another than Google running servers within its own, Google essentially is a central authority, or Facebook, right? That's who we trust now with this model. We say, well, nobody else can log into my Gmail, so I guess only I can read my email, right? We sort of throw up our hands at this idea. And it's encrypted from Google to you, and it's encrypted from you to Google, but the decentralized ecosystem challenges us to do something more than that, to create, in some cases, end-to-end encryption schemes, but at very least, encryption schemes which utilize the full gamut of possible cryptographic primitives in order to have the kind of secret management that you need in your distributed ecosystem. So, Ursula, for example, again, is the one that we use proxy. This is the power of proxy re-encryption, and when you make a policy, you select a number of Ursulas. So you say, we call the number of Ursulas that'll be in your policy, we call that N. And of those Ursulas, Bob needs to visit at least M of these. So this is an M of N scheme. And M of N schemes are a great example of the kind of thing that are very, very challenging to do in a disinterested way. And by disinterested, I mean resistant to arbitrary collusion, resistant to what sometimes are called Sybil attacks. Hey, there's another character, Sybil, right? There's another classic character in the cryptographic narrative. The blockchain is good for this. And so what NuCypher does is dredge up these cryptographic primitives and say, hey, maybe this thing that didn't achieve mainstream prominence before can now, because we have the blockchain. Okay, so what I'm going to do now I guess I'll sing for a minute. So let's walk through a quick module. Even if you've never seen Python before, try to stay with me in the logic here. I'm hoping this will be easy enough for you to read. We call this our Finnegan's Wake demo because we encrypt line by line passages from James Joyce's novel Finnegan's Wake. So the first thing we do is make an Ursula, as we've discussed above. Now, on line 43 in this comment, we introduce you to another policy that I already talked about verbally a couple times. I'm sorry, another model that I already talked about verbally a couple times that we call policy. Okay, so a policy is Alice authorizing Bob to access something. Alice sets a policy that says, I want to share this resource with Bob. Alice does this by denoting this resource as having a label. We'll get to that in just a minute, but that gives you sort of the four corners of policy. So here are the details. We want to say when it's going to end. In this case, it's 5 days from now. We set our M and N values. I don't know why I have 1 and 1 there. That's silly. Let's do 2 and 3, because I've been messing with this file, actually. Actually, let's do a whole bunch of Control-Z. Okay, that's better. Riot. Forgot to close down Riot or something. and our label is whatever, secret files and stuff. Now we introduce you to Alice, the authority of the policy. Now remember, in this sort of narrative from yesteryear, Alice and Bob were essentially, although they were characters in an asymmetric cryptography scheme, they essentially did the same thing. They were essentially symmetric with one another. Here they do different things. They're not quite the same empowered actor on your network. Alice is the authority of the policy, decides who's in and who's out. The who's in and who's out, we call them Bob. So, there's really nothing that we're passing here to Alice that's particularly important for the purpose of this discussion. Just understand that sort of this is where some of the internals go. And if you want to follow how our thing works, you can dive down in here and see what these different options do. Now check this out. We're going to make a policy public key. This is the key for which everybody is going to encrypt when they want to share stuff with Bob, with all the Bobs. Alice can do this before she's even created the policy, which is to say before she's even done anything on the blockchain. So here's where we get that public key right here. We do alice.getPolicy public key from label. And it's worth saying at this point that we have CLI and sort of REST-like, although we're not convinced that RPC or REST are sort of still appropriate in the decentralized network, but we have an HTTP interface that can do each of these steps as well. Okay, now we have Bob. Bob takes essentially the same arguments as Alice, which is to say they're not really worth talking about this second. Okay, Alice here starts what we call her learning loop. She starts learning about the network, and now 74 is perhaps where the interesting thing happens that you wouldn't see in any cryptographic narrative that I'm aware of outside of NuCypher. Alice grants to Bob on this label with these values of M and N. This means that in order for Bob to receive messages on this label, he'll need to visit any M among N Ursulas that our network selects. Let me pause for a moment here to say that the economics of the situation between these two are such that Ursula is the one who has to stake the NuCypher token, right? So Ursula demonstrates that she's following the rules of the network by staking a token, a work token, not that different really than other work tokens you've seen around. We've got cool, interesting things that make it different. For example, we can determine on the blockchain whether Ursula has attempted to mislead Bob by giving back garbage, that kind of thing. But other than that, it's a sort of fairly typical work token. And Alice here will have to pay for the policy in Ether. Now, Alice puts her public key somewhere for Bob to find later, some kind of a side channel. Here we just store it in memory. And then Alice can disappear completely from the internet. Okay, now Alice disappears, some time passes, and then we have Bob. Now with Alice offline, it's time to get out of D. Move up to like A. With Alice gone from the internet, Bob can join the policy. So maybe at this point in your mind, you've started to map who Alice might be in your app, who Bob might be in your app, and then we've already talked about Ursula, and I'm going to introduce one more character before this is over. If you have a clean mapping to each of these four characters in what you're trying to do in your app, we'd love to hear about that. Our table is, where's our table? Right outside these doors, basically, right? Or yeah, right out into the right here. So do come and talk to us. We'd love to hear if you have a one-to-one mapping to Alice and Bob, and I'm going to introduce Enrico the encryptor in a little bit. If you have a one-to-one mapping to each of those three, we'd love to hear about that. Particularly if it's some kind of a weird in-game universe case, I'd love to hear about that because I'm very interested to see sort of how gaming secrecy evolves on the blockchain. And here we're going to read, we get the path of the book, we read the book, and then we're going to iterate through the lines in this book, Finnegan's Wake. And now we make Enrico. Enrico needs the policy public key, and he encrypts a message here, and you see he gets the single passage and the signature. And then he leaves his public key somewhere to be found, and then he disappears from the network himself. And now look what Bob does. Bob reconstructs Enrico with that public key that he left behind. And now Bob can retrieve the original message. Now, I don't know. I just went through a crazy heck of a lot. I basically took you through a year and a half of NuCypher discovering our identity and developing this sort of schema and protocol and way of thinking about this. So let me stop now and ask who has questions. What do you got? Yeah, because we only have 6 minutes left, and I'm not sure what it really shows for me to run this thing, except to suffice to say that it does run. But I mean, I'm happy to. But if there's a discussion to be had, that'd be even better. Starts with a K. Keon. Yeah. 74. This is why we have line numbers. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So the question is, how dare I describe line 74 as having some unique quality when it really just seems to be traditional M event encryption? Maybe you're thinking of like Shamir secret sharing or something like this? Yeah, okay. So imagine for a moment what would happen if this were naked Shamir secret sharing. By the way, I think that's groovy, and we probably will deploy a character that does exactly that in the future. But we're sort of really interested in showing that we can bring a fairly novel cryptographic primitive to the forefront before we just, lean on something that is already as well promulgated as Shamir secret sharing. But in Shamir secret sharing, what would happen here is that I suspect that you wouldn't have Bob here on the other end at all, right? Because Alice doesn't really grant to Bob. In Shamir secret sharing, if people don't know, Alice can split up a secret, an arbitrary secret, anything, she can take her journal and divide it among n holders of the secret, and any m of them can put the secret back together. Okay, so this is useful maybe for the sort of traditional scenario pre-blockchain that sometimes is discussed, is if you want to have like your master secret to your password manager that maybe you wouldn't give away in life, but maybe you'd give 3 or 4 shares to very close friends, and knowing that no 3 of them would collude to impersonate you, but in the event of your untimely death, they could come together with these 3 shares and have access to all your stuff, right? So what Shamir secret sharing would do in this is allow M Ursulas to collude to get the secret. You see? Here, and this is what makes this different, and unique might be too strong a word, although I can't say I've ever seen anything done like it in a decentralized blockchain incentivized way, is that only Bob can get the secret. After the M Ursulas, what we like to say is that Bob goes on his journey with a capsule and a secret inside. These are all classes in our code base. And Bob's journey involves imploring at least M Ursulas to attach CFrags, ciphertext fragments, to that capsule. Once he has M CFrags, he can, with his own private key, obtain the secret. Say again? Only to him? Well, Alice can add other Bobs to the policy. So let's say only to those Bobs who've been granted on the policy. Right. Other questions? How about like really beginner? Who got lost a little early and wants a little bit of like who has? Okay, who feels like super comfortable with everything I've said and you totally get it? Yeah, okay. So I mean, there's different levels of following along. So if you're a lower level of following along, ask a foundational question, because other people almost certainly have the same question, and this is your time.
Going back to what you guys do.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that if you have a client who wants to employ a certain encryption scheme, they come to you guys implement it. Is that how it works?
No. What we do is build blockchain-based characters who stake our token, and those characters follow the rules of the network that we lay out, including using these encryption schemes that have some kind of need for disinterest. In other words, some kind of anti-Sybil attack, anti-collusion, or just the economic impact of needing to follow the rules in a verifiable way or risk being slashed, right? We don't build anything specific for any corporation or government. At least that's certainly not our typical wheelhouse. We're building things for you. We build things that are on the blockchain, that are there for you to use, and you have to pay a little bit of ether for them, right? So anyone building our decentralized application with any kind of a secret to manage are our clients. Yeah, Chris.
So is this like some sort of smart contract? Like how does
So we do have smart contracts that are written in Solidity, with the exception of those smart contracts and a little bit of Bash. The entirety of the rest of our code base, more than 99%, is in Python. So the way that the interaction happens is that when Alice grants here, for example, what's happening under the hood is that we're running a smart contract function wherein Alice samples the network for who is staking our token and selects from among those who are staking our token that have already vowed to stake beyond the end of the expiration time on line 77. So that's like one example. Another example, which is not depicted here, but which might be interesting to you, is that if Bob opens up the capsule at the end and there's apparent garbage inside, he can initiate a dispute using a smart contract. And there's a smart contract that can actually take as input the ciphertext and determine whether Ursula has given Bob garbage, which is a suggestion that she is not doing the right thing by our network, and in that case, she will be slashed some of her new cipher token. So those are the sorts of ways that we have interactivity with the smart contract. We don't do... If you were like making a top 5 list for incredibly compelling use cases for smart contracts, I don't know that this presentation would be on your list, right? What we use smart contracts for are to enforce what we think are already novel and exciting cryptographic concepts that just needed a little bit of help from a smart contract to enforce some kind of anti-collusion or good behavior scheme. Because without those, the cryptographic primitive is sort of hollow and never went anywhere, right? So again, this is proxy re-encryption is a cryptographic primitive from 1998. It's not super new, and yet it's not a household name yet. We think in part because there has not yet been a blockchain to enforce the anti-collusion properties that are necessary to really do it right. That's kind of what we're staking on. All right. Yeah.
So,
I didn't get your name.
My name is Dean.
Dean?
Good to meet you.
Yeah, hey.
Yeah, so is there any sort of like node discovery mechanism, or like how do Alice and Bob have to have prearranged?
Dean has been sent here from Portland to distract me with a topic that I could discuss day and night. His question is there some kind of a node discovery mechanism, or why am I able to just do alice.grant Bob? Yeah, there is a node discovery mechanism happening under the hood here. Really what's happening here literally in this module is that Bob is in memory. But in terms of how the network works, that would normally be the case. It's not impossible, but in terms of how it would normally work, we have a node discovery. We've actually rolled our own node discovery. We have a blog post about that. Our new cipher works actually without the blockchain at all in a federated mode. You can see I have federated only here. And that means that there's no blockchain component. They just discover each other. But of course, that's super susceptible to a Sybil attack. You wouldn't want to use such a network. That'd be essentially the same as trusting one party with all of your re-encryption nodes again.
So could Bob buy data from Alice via a smart contract? Like, because I think you need to bake like some secrets into the smart contract at that point.
Yeah, we want pay to encrypt is a thing. This is like we're right on schedule there because I think we're about 5 minutes into the Q&A, which is when we usually get that question. So good. We don't yet support a pay to encrypt scheme. There are a few different ways that you can imagine it being done. One that could be done with really very little further ado would be for Alice to grant already, generating the cryptographic material necessary, handing it over to Ursula just as she does now, but Ursula refusing to perform the task until Bob pays. That's one way to do it. And there are several other ways which we have thought of, which we're happy to discuss, but maybe that prompts you a little. That is not functionality that's built into our network yet. It's also not something we're planning to build before mainnet, but it's something that if it comes to a vote, I will happily vote in favor of shortly after we launch on mainnet. Yeah, Madhur?
So how much like Bob needs to pay to get IC9?
How what?
Ether that Bob needs to pay to get
I don't think we know yet how much Ether policies are going to cost. Right now it's Alice who pays, not Bob. Right now it's Alice who pays. Yeah. But again, it could be Bob. It wouldn't be. There'd be no incredible gymnastics to make that happen, and that's maybe something we'll address shortly after mainnet. But we don't actually have really a number. I think we actually have it defaulted to 0 right now while we poke and prod. Is that right, Kieran? Yeah. So we don't know. Depends what kind of a market there is for it. I mean, you know, and by the way, I know we're an ETH global event, but let me say loudly and proudly, we're not sure Ethereum's the right blockchain for us. No, I don't know if anybody is. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We are planning to deploy on the Ethereum blockchain, but if the economics line up in such a way that either Ethereum doesn't make sense or the use of a micropayments technology on top of or off to the side of Ethereum make more sense, you know, it's our code is sufficiently portable. And for you, that means that in terms of hacking projects, we don't need to see anything that necessarily relies or assumes that Ethereum is the end-all, be-all blockchain. We are deploying on it for now. We do have a lot of confidence in it for now. But we are interested in seeing any of the variety of ways that you might use the technology, even if it means that you sort of have to skim over the details of payment. I think we might be done here. We're done, right? We're wrapping it up. All right, well, listen, Dean, Madhur, Snee, Oren, Kian, Chris, MD, everybody in the room, thanks so much for joining. We'll come to our table.